First, let's talk about the pattern. So up here, I have a more expanded version of it just so that you can kind of visualize how this is going to look. Herringbone is a very normal pattern. It's kind of like a twill, but it is broken apart to give it a different effect. There will be a list in the description box below for all the tools and materials I'm using for this example. On my loom, I have warped 24 strings of 8/8 black cotton and 2 strings of 8/8 natural cotton. These 2 strings on the ends I've made in white just to simply help you visualize the floating warp. You can do your whole warp in the same color, which would be a total of 26 strings, and this is a 4 ends per inch loom. At the bottom, I have done just 1 row of twining to anchor the weaving, and I'm using Lion Brand Woolies Thick and Quick in just the natural color. I believe it's called Fisherman. Down here, we have the entire repeat of the pattern. So this pattern only consists of 4 weft rows. On the sides, I have colored in what I'm calling the floating warp. This is just so that we always have a string to go around on the edges to not disrupt our pattern. So now we're gonna get started. I'm going to thread my tapestry needle. In the patterns that I create, all the colored in blocks represent going over 1 warp string, and all the white blocks represent going under 1 warp string. And again, for the floating warp, we can go over or under depending on what we need. So since the first row of the pattern is an under, I'm going to go over our floating warp. Then we're going to go under 1 warp string, over 2 warp strings, under 2, over 1, under 1. Then now that repeats. So we're going over 2, under 2, over 1, under 1. Over 2, under 2, over 1, under 1, over 2, under 2, over 1, and in this case, I'm going to go under the floating warp. Make sure you always create that arch and give it a little pull on the sides as well. And this is one of those pieces that I'm not going to be beating down the weft very firmly. I'm gonna let it just stack on top of each other without pushing down too much. So to switch rows, now we're on the second row. So you can always cover up the other rows if you're getting a little bit lost. In this case, I'm gonna go over 3 because we've come under that floating warp. So we need to go over it in the next row. So I'm going over 3, under 2, over 2, and this row is super simple. It's just under 2, over 2, under 2, over 2. And here at the end, I am gonna go over the floating warp string. Create that arch, and you can see again, gently beating down the weft and moving on to the 3rd row. So for this row, because we went over the floating warp in the last row, I'm going to go under in the next, and then we're going over 1, under 2, over 2, under 1, over 1. And that same thing repeats. Under 2, over 2, under 1, over 1. Under 2, over 2, under 1, over 1. Under 2, over 2, under 1, and then I'm gonna go over the floating warp. You can always give your warp a little bit of a strum if it seems like it's getting uneven, and then gently beat down the weft. Now we're moving on to the 4th and final row of this pattern. I'm going to go under 3 because we went over our floating warp. So under 3, over 2, under 2, over 2, under 2, over 2, and that goes all the way across. But in this case, again, I'm just gonna go over 2 at the end, and then I'm gonna go underneath the floating warp string. Create that little arch, give it a tug, and beat the weft down. So now that I've completed the first 4 rows, you can just continue to repeat those 4 rows as long as you like. So I'm going to do a number of rows so that we can see this pattern come together. Thank you so much to all our patrons who support the channel so that we can continue to make these weaving videos. To grab any of our weaving tools, warp string, as well as this pattern, you can head over to spruceandlinen.com and click this playlist here to watch more of our weaving pattern tutorials.